The cellar smelled of damp stone and despair, chill that clung to the bones of anyone unfortunate enough to linger within its confines. Lady Elara Whitcombe sat curled in a narrow corner, her skirts torn and dulled by weeks of neglect. Her once fair hair, now matted with dust, framed a pale face that had known more cruelty than comfort. She clutched a tattered shawl about her shoulders, the fabric a poor substitute for warmth or dignity. Each flicker of the lantern cast monstrous shadows along the walls. And in those shadows, she saw the reflection of a life stolen. Above her, the grand halls of Harrowgate Hall teemed with laughter and finery, oblivious to the quiet torment beneath their polished floors. Yet even amid isolation, her mind traced the cruel choreography of the household. Every whisper, every glance above was a reminder of her displacement. Her status stripped by the ruthless hand of her stepmother, Duchess Rowena. The winter wind pressed against the windows high above, carrying with it the faint strains of a pianoforte. Servants moved with mechanical precision, bearing trays of delicacies that Elara would never taste, the very air she breathed tainted with reminders of her exclusion. It was the sort of refined cruelty that masqueraded as propriety. The elegance of etiquette bending like a knife against a girl too young, too gentle, and too noble to resist. In the center of her despair was the knowledge that she existed as both object and secret, an invisible pawn in Rowena's elaborate design. The Duchess's charm and reputation in society rendered Elara's protests meaningless, her voice muffled beneath layers of politeness and protocol. Each day she survived was a battle, her soul bracing against the constant erosion of hope. And yet, in the midst of suffocating shadow, there lingered the faintest pulse of anticipation. Outside the cellar, the household prepared for the arrival of the Duke. Miles Harrowgate, a man whose presence was both a herald of change and an embodiment of judgment. He was a figure whispered about in every corner of London society, a man whose reputation was carved from both charm and intimidation. Not merely handsome, but magnetic. Not merely noble, but feared. Tales of his discernment and stern justice preceded him like the distant toll of a cathedral bell. Some called him cold, others a savior of hearts undone. Elara, hidden and unheard, felt the stirrings of hope that perhaps, at last, the tides of her confinement might shift. The arrival of the Duke, however, was not greeted with ceremony for her. A servant paused at the bottom of the cellar steps, peering down with tentative curiosity. "Mistress Elara," he whispered, voice quivering, "the Duke has returned. He inquires after your welfare." The words struck her like a sudden draught, cold and unexpected. She pressed her hands to her mouth, not in fear, but in disbelief. The Duke, the man who could command the entire estate with a word, had spoken her name. Could it be that her fate, hitherto dictated by whispers and malice, might now pivot upon a single potent presence? Rowena, elegant as a winter rose, and equally sharp, awaited the Duke in the drawing-room above, her steps deliberate, her composure perfected. She knew the effect her niece's discovery would have. Miles Harrowgate was a man of principle and curiosity, and a revelation of cruelty would test even his legendary patience. The Duchess's mind was a garden of schemes, each petal a calculated deception, each thorn a trap for those who might challenge her authority. Yet even she could not anticipate fully the force of a man returned from the continent, a man whose eyes had been trained to detect both treachery and despair in equal measure. As the grand double doors opened, sunlight failed to reach the depths of the cellar, but a different light, one far warmer, filtered in through the doorway. The Duke's silhouette appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, cloaked in the aura of command. His gaze, calm yet piercing, swept the room with quiet authority. And upon discovering Elara, narrowed slightly, curiosity and concern warring within him. She shrank back instinctively, a fragile bird uncertain if it could trust the predator before her. Yet he did not approach as a man seeking victory. He moved as one seeking understanding, a rare and careful grace marking every step. The lantern trembled in her hand, the flame quivering as if in anticipation of what would come next. He knelt before her, careful not to startle, his eyes meeting hers with a steady gentleness that belied the rumors surrounding his temper. "Lady Elara," he said, voice low and measured, almost a caress, "I am told you have endured much in my absence. You will not suffer further without my knowledge. Will you rise?" The words carried authority, yet beneath them lay a thread of empathy that startled her. She hesitated, uncertain if the kindness was genuine, if mercy might exist in a household defined by cruelty. Slowly, she rose, her knees weak, but her spine straightening as dignity. Long suppressed, flickered to life. Above them, the estate buzzed with oblivious indifference. Servants whispered amongst themselves, some curious, some fearful, all aware that the Duke's attention could alter lives irrevocably. In that moment, Elara realized the stakes of her position. She was no longer merely the victim of a stepmother's schemes. She had become a figure in a new narrative, one written with her survival and the Duke's resolve as co-authors. Her heart, long encased in a shell of quiet despair, beat with an unfamiliar rhythm. Hope, fragile and insistent, made its first audible mark. Yet the shadow of Rowena loomed like a specter, unseen but felt. Her eyes, sharp from above, tracked the scene with calculating precision, already spinning the next web. Elara understood instinctively that liberation would not be granted lightly, that freedom demanded vigilance and courage. The Duke, unaware of the full extent of the peril, had only glimpsed the surface of her plight, yet his presence alone changed the parameters of her imprisonment. She met his gaze not with supplication, but with the tentative assertion of self, the first step toward reclaiming a life denied. And so, in the cold, stone cellar beneath the glittering world of Harrowgate Hall, the first threads of revolution were quietly woven. The girl who had existed in shadows and whispers now stood before a man who could bend the world to justice or vengeance. The air shifted imperceptibly, heavy with expectation, and as the Duke extended a hand, offering both aid and allegiance, Elara's fingers brushed against his in a tentative, fleeting contact. It was a spark, subtle but undeniable, a beginning that promised upheaval and perhaps redemption. The moment held, pregnant with possibility, and the cellar, once a tomb of despair, seemed to breathe with the pulse of nascent hope. Outside, the world continued its elegant cruelty. Yet within that dim chamber, a story of resilience, courage, and unspoken longing had quietly begun. Elara understood, as did the Duke, that the coming days would demand every ounce of resolve, every whisper of cunning, and every heartbeat of courage. The shadows had not yet retreated, but the light had entered, and nothing in Harrowgate Hall would remain unchanged. The candlelight flickered across the stone walls as Lady Elara Whitcombe allowed herself a moment of trembling composure. The Duke's hand, warm and steady, lingered for a heartbeat before releasing her, as if acknowledging both the fragility and courage she carried within. She adjusted her shawl, now more a symbol of her endurance than mere protection against the cold, and lifted her eyes to meet his with cautious curiosity. There was a magnetism about him, a presence that suggested authority without arrogance, that demanded honesty without coercion. In those brief moments, he became not merely a figure of power, but an anchor, a possibility of reprieve from the relentless shadow that had shaped her days and nights. Outside, the winter sun filtered through frost-laced windows, painting the grand hall above with pale light. Servants moved about, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of society that Rowena had so meticulously maintained. Gossip traveled quickly in Harrowgate Hall, and the whispering corridors held every rumor like precious cargo. Already, murmurs began to circulate about the Duke's return and the hidden girl beneath the household's polished surface. Some were startled, some skeptical, yet none dared challenge the narrative the Duke might choose to craft. Above all, Rowena's own lips tightened in a thin, controlled line. She recognized with growing unease that her carefully arranged dominion was vulnerable to a force she had neither anticipated nor comprehended. The Duke led Elara toward the cellar's narrow steps, his hand brushing against hers once more, a subtle gesture of protection that spoke volumes. "You shall not remain unseen any longer," he murmured, his voice low yet clear. resonating against the stone like the first chords of an awakening symphony. She nodded, uncertain whether relief, fear, or anticipation predominated in her chest. His eyes lingered on her, observant and unflinching, as though he were reading each layer of shame, endurance, and hidden grace that the world above had tried so systematically to erase. In that gaze, she felt both exposed and safeguarded, a paradox that stirred the faintest ember of hope. By the time they emerged into the hall, the estate seemed transformed. The air, perfumed with wax and wood smoke, carried a tension that had not existed before. Servants paused mid-task, heads tilting, eyes narrowing or widening, as though perceiving a subtle shift in the hierarchy. The Duke's stride was deliberate, measured, a quiet declaration that he would tolerate no interference in what he had discovered. Elara walked beside him, tentative yet emboldened, her skirts brushing the polished floor with a rhythm that echoed her newfound determination. She was no longer merely the girl locked away. She was becoming a figure whose presence demanded acknowledgement, whose dignity, though fragile, could not be so easily diminished. The first token of his protection arrived in the form of a small, delicate ring. The Duke removed it from his coat pocket with the precision of one handling both treasure and responsibility. He knelt before her, the gesture intimate without impropriety, and extended the object toward her. "Keep this," he said, his gaze unwavering. "It is both a promise and a shield. Let it remind you that no one may harm you while I have breath to prevent it." The ring, modest, yet elegant, glimmered in the light, its significance transcending mere ornamentation. It was an emblem of trust, a private acknowledgement of her value, and a subtle challenge to the world above, which had long judged her unworthy. As the day progressed, murmurs of scandal began to take form. Rowena, quick to recognize the peril, moved among the household with all the grace and venom of a coiled serpent. She whispered to trusted attendants, painted Elara as dangerous and deceitful, a girl whose presence threatened the delicacy of social order. The gossip rippled outward, reaching the ears of distant acquaintances and family alike. The Duke, perceptive and deliberate, allowed the whispers to reach him. Observing each reaction, noting every glimmer of truth and exaggeration, in the subtle interplay of rumor and reaction, he discerned the architecture of cruelty that had imprisoned Elara, and the magnitude of courage required simply to endure. A winter luncheon convened, ostensibly a routine gathering of the household. Yet every eye seemed drawn to the figures who now moved together, the Duke and the girl he had uncovered. As they entered, conversations faltered, silverware paused midair, and eyes darted between subtle points of intrigue and open curiosity. The Duke seated Elara beside him, a deliberate act that disrupted expectations and social convention in a manner both elegant and irrevocable. She felt the weight of every gaze, yet also the strength of his presence beside her, an anchor against the tidal waves of judgment. It was a moment fraught with unspoken defiance, a public affirmation of her worth in the face of whispered condemnation. The tension between them was palpable, yet restrained. The Duke's hand occasionally brushed hers in moments of shared gesture, a touch of reassurance when a serving tray wobbled, a subtle pivot of a chair to afford her comfort, a glance that acknowledged her courage without requiring explanation. Each gesture was a careful blend of authority and intimacy, establishing a rhythm in which trust could grow even amid the cacophony of suspicion. Elara responded in kind, tentative at first, gradually allowing herself to be steadied by his attention, her posture straightening, her chin lifting as though discovering the contours of her own agency anew. Yet above all, the shadow of Rowena loomed, relentless and calculating. Her eyes, sharp as icicles, followed every movement, every flicker of understanding or vulnerability. She whispered threats, veiled in propriety, reminders that society would not tolerate deviation, that a girl of no claim could not rise above her assigned station. The Duke, unshaken, met her manipulations with measured calm, his presence a counterweight to every calculated insinuation. In the silent war of wills that unfolded, Elara began to perceive the power of subtle defiance. The way courage, even small and tentative, could ripple outward to alter the very architecture of control. As the afternoon waned, The first threads of true alliance were woven. The Duke, ever watchful, guided Elara to a window that framed the frost-bound gardens. Sunlight glinting on snow-dusted hedges. "Do you see," he said quietly, "how even in cold the world endures beauty? You, too, possess such endurance, and it shall not be overlooked." The words, simple yet profound, struck her with a mixture of relief and wonder. For the first time, she sensed that her existence, long dismissed and hidden, might hold weight, meaning even power. Her pulse, long slowed by fear and suppression, quickened in rhythm with a fragile but insistent hope by the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the hall. Elara understood the stakes. She had been discovered, yet not yet rescued. She was recognized, yet still vulnerable to rumor, jealousy, and malice. The Duke's presence had shifted the balance, but the path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with peril and intrigue. As she gazed at the fading light, a tremor of anticipation stirred within her. A story was beginning that demanded courage, resilience, and the willingness to seize fleeting moments of trust. She had emerged from the cellar not merely as a survivor, but as a participant in a game whose rules were yet to be written. And somewhere within that delicate equilibrium, the faintest whisper of destiny had begun to hum. The moon hung low over Harrowgate Hall, casting its silver light across frost-kissed gardens and the stately stone facade. Within the glass-enclosed conservatory, where orchids bloomed despite winter's chill, Lady Elara Whitcombe found herself, stepping cautiously beside the Duke. The air inside was heavy with the scent of soil and petals, fragrant with the quiet persistence of life in defiance of frost. She hesitated by a wrought iron railing, her hands brushing against the delicate fronds, as if drawing courage from the resilience of the plants themselves. The Duke's presence beside her was both grounding and formidable. He did not speak immediately, allowing the silence to become a conduit for reflection. For acknowledgement of the hardships she had endured, "You have carried more than any girl should," he said finally, voice low and measured, touching the stillness like a feather on glass. His gaze, unwavering, sought hers with a mixture of inquiry and gentleness, as though inviting her to reveal what the world above had long denied him the chance to witness. Elira's throat tightened. She had rehearsed the words she might never dare utter, yet here, in the protective intimacy of the conservatory, the truths pressed forward with an urgent insistence. She drew a breath, the cool air sharp against her lungs, and began. "She beat me," she whispered, almost as if admitting it aloud might shatter the fragile balance of her own courage. "My stepmother. She has taken everything from me: food, warmth, dignity. Even the very air felt like a privilege." Her eyes flickered toward him, seeking not pity, but comprehension. The Duke's expression remained unreadable for a heartbeat, then softened in a way that startled her. "You speak not merely of cruelty, but of endurance," he observed, his voice carrying both reverence and quiet authority. "Few possess the fortitude to survive as you have. Tell me, Lady Elara, have you feared that none would believe you?" Her lips trembled, and she nodded. "Always," she admitted. "Even the servants, those whose loyalty might be true, they look at me with doubt, as if my suffering were self-inflicted. I wondered, if you too would see me as a child of lies, a burden unfit for attention?" He took a deliberate step closer, though not imposing, and offered his hand not to lead, but as a gesture of shared strength. "You are no burden. I have seen enough of the world to discern falsehood from truth, and your presence speaks louder than whispers ever could." Her fingers brushed against his briefly, a tremulous connection. And in that small touch lay an unspoken acknowledgement, trust, fragile yet forming. She revealed further details then, each one a delicate confession. How Rowena had withheld nourishment, how cruelly words had been wielded as weapons, how even her father's absence had left her unmoored. The Duke listened without interruption, his posture patient, his eyes absorbing each story with quiet intensity. There was no judgment, no flourish of condescension, only the weight of attention, rare and precious, that made her feel seen as she had never been. The chamber, with its glass walls and whispering orchids, seemed suspended in time, a private haven amid the turbulence of Harrowgate Hall. He, too, shared fragments of his own past, though carefully and sparingly, as one would reveal a delicate artifact. He spoke of his father's marriage to Rowena, the coldness of a household that prized wealth over affection, and the early lessons in vigilance and restraint that had shaped him. I learned, he said softly, that cruelty often wears the mask of civility. It is not enough to recognize it. One must anticipate, prepare, and, when necessary, defy it. His words struck a chord in her, resonating with the endurance she had cultivated for survival. And yet beneath the pragmatism there was an undercurrent of vulnerability. He, too, had known isolation, had known the sharp edge of neglect, had understood how a house of elegance could become a prison. The second token of trust arrived in the quiet exchange of a small ribbon-bound lock of hair, the last remnant of her mother, carefully preserved against the years. Elara handed it to him with trembling hands, her gesture laden with significance beyond words. "I have kept this," she murmured, "though it is nothing more than memory. It is all I have left of her." The Duke accepted it with reverent care, understanding the weight of heritage and sentiment it carried. "It shall be safeguarded," he replied, "as shall you. Nothing in this house may touch what is yours without my knowledge." In that act, a bond was sealed, intimate yet unspoken, a mutual acknowledgement of reliance and respect that transcended the ordinary constraints of master and ward. The orchids swayed gently in the draught from the conservatory doors, and in their quiet motion, there was an echo of the emotions rippling between them: fragile hope, cautious longing, the tremor of understanding that something rare and enduring could be born from shared hardship. Elara felt her breath catch as their hands brushed again. This time a fleeting but deliberate connection. A wordless confirmation that neither the past nor the present could entirely define them. Each glance, each careful movement carried weight, the gravity of restraint shaping an intimacy that neither required declaration nor demanded it. The conservatory became a chamber of revelation, each shadow and reflection a testament to the subtleties of trust and the tentative assent of courage. Yet even in this sanctuary, the world beyond remained relentless. A footstep, hurried and hesitant, announced the intrusion of reality. A young servant, flushed with urgency, delivered news that sent a ripple of unease through the warm atmosphere. "Your Grace," he stammered, "the Duchess has summoned the magistrate. There are allegations documents, questioning Lady Elara's propriety and inheritance." The words hung heavy, slicing through the delicate bubble they had cultivated. Elara's hands clenched at her sides, her pulse quickening, yet she did not falter in the Duke's presence. His gaze, firm and unwavering, met hers with steady reassurance. "We shall confront this together," he said quietly. "No accusation shall stand while truth has a voice, and I intend that it shall be heard." In the tense stillness that followed, Elara felt the weight of both fear and anticipation. The intrusion reminded her that freedom was not a single act, but a continuous struggle. That vindication and safety were never granted without vigilance and courage. She had begun to perceive that the path toward dignity, though fraught with peril, was illuminated by steadfast allies and careful trust. In that dim light, surrounded by the subtle fragrance of orchids and the silver glow of the moon, she understood that the narrative of her life was shifting. She was no longer merely the object of cruelty. She was an active participant in her own destiny, guided by the presence of a man whose understanding and protection transcended the ordinary boundaries of society. As the conservatory grew quiet once more, with only the whisper of orchids and the distant echo of footsteps in the hall, a sense of resolve settled upon her. The coming days would demand ingenuity, courage, and perhaps more daring than she had ever summoned before. Yet for the first time, she felt the stirrings of hope that it could be accomplished. The Duke, standing close yet unobtrusive, remained an anchor and a promise. In the delicate interplay of trust, revelation, and shared vulnerability, the fragile beginnings of an alliance and of something yet deeper had been forged. The night held them in its embrace, a prelude to trials, confrontations, and the unfolding of truths that neither had fully comprehended, but both were now bound to navigate together. The grand hall of Harrowgate echoed with the faint murmur of assembled guests, their conversation tempered by curiosity and expectation. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across polished oak floors, illuminating faces both curious and judgmental. Lady Elara Whitcombe entered with the Duke at her side, each step deliberate, her skirts sweeping the floor in a rhythm that spoke of renewed dignity. The weight of every gaze pressed upon her, yet she no longer shrank beneath it. She felt the steady, grounding presence of Miles Harrowgate beside her, a silent promise that neither whisper nor accusation could unseat the fragile ground they now occupied together. In the hall above, the air trembled with the anticipation of revelation, as Rowena, flawless in appearance and venomous in intent, prepared to confront what she deemed an insolent challenge to her authority. The magistrate, a man of austere countenance and unwavering impartiality, took his place near the dais, his ledger open and pen poised to record every declaration. Rowena's eyes, sharp and calculating, flitted between Elara and the Duke, her lips a thin line that betrayed nothing, yet hinted at the storm beneath. She raised her voice with controlled elegance, casting accusations that were equal parts refinement and malice. "Your Grace," she began, voice smooth as silk, yet laced with poison, "it has come to my attention that Lady Elara Whitcombe has acted with impropriety, attempting to claim rights and privileges to which she is neither entitled nor born." Every syllable dripped with condescension, every gesture measured to convey authority, yet the undercurrent of fear she sought to project betrayed her awareness of the precarious position she now faced. The Duke's gaze, unwavering and luminous, met Rowena's with the precision of a blade tempered by justice. "The only impropriety in this house," he said, voice calm yet commanding, "has been the deliberate concealment and mistreatment of a girl wholly innocent of any crime but survival." His words echoed through the hall, a measured declaration that carried the weight of both protection and moral certainty. Gasps rippled through the assembly, whispers flaring like sparks along a dry hearth. Elara, her fingers lightly brushing against the Duke's arm, felt the surge of vindication and fear intermingling, an emotional tide that threatened to overwhelm, yet emboldened her simultaneously. Rowena's eyes narrowed, calculating the effect of every reaction. "Your Grace exaggerates," she countered, though the tremor in her composure betrayed the fragility of her position. She produced documents, letters, and accounts, meticulously forged to support her claim, a fortress of falsehood constructed with the care of a master artisan. Yet the Duke, anticipating deception, had already gathered counter-evidence, sworn statements from servants, records of withheld provisions, and proof of the cellar's existence as a place of confinement rather than neglect. He laid each piece before the magistrate with deliberate clarity, his movements precise, commanding, yet devoid of ostentation. The room shifted perceptibly. The balance of power, once assumed by Rowena's social cunning, teetered under the weight of truth and authority combined. Elara, standing beside him, felt the invisible chains of shame loosen with every declaration. The Duke's presence transformed her vulnerability into a quiet strength. Her own voice, when summoned, steady and dignified. "I have endured," she said, "not as accusation, but as testament. The judgments and whispers of those who believe in propriety without compassion. Yet my endurance is no crime. It is the only truth I possess." Her words, measured and graceful, resonated across the hall, cutting through the veneer of social pretense that Rowena had cultivated for years. The assembly, long conditioned to deference, listened with rapt attention, the power of sincerity eclipsing even the most polished machinations of wealth and influence. The Duke knelt before her, not in ceremony, but in the solemn act of vindication. "Lady Elara Whitcombe," he intoned, voice resonant and unwavering, "by my honor as Duke of Harrowgate, I shield you from further indignity. No document, no whisper, no veil of falsehood shall stand against the truth that you embody." The gesture, deliberate and public, left the audience suspended between astonishment and admiration. Rowena's composure faltered. The carefully constructed mask of superiority cracked, revealing glimpses of fear, fury, and disbelief. The room, a microcosm of society itself, recognized the seismic shift. A girl once hidden, now defended by the highest authority in the house, had irrevocably altered the hierarchy that had governed their lives, with Rowena effectively silenced. The Duke took a subtle step toward Elara, offering his hand. "If your only crime has been survival, then let my allegiance be your safeguard," he murmured. Their hands met, fingers interlacing in a gesture that spoke volumes beyond any spoken declaration. In that touch lay trust, protection, and the nascent stirrings of love. A quiet assertion that the world's judgments could be countered by courage, integrity, and unwavering support. The hall seemed to exhale collectively, the tension ebbing, replaced by an almost palpable reverence for the moment of moral triumph and emotional honesty. The magistrate, observing the exchange with impartial scrutiny, nodded in acknowledgement. "The charges against Lady Elara Whitcombe are hereby dismissed," he declared, his voice formal and conclusive. "Evidence indicates that her treatment was unjust and that she has endured without fault or malice. The household shall recognize her standing accordingly." Relief and awe rippled through the assembly. Servants exchanged discreet glances of admiration. While guests murmured in hushed tones, the scandal transformed into a narrative of triumph. The power of truth, when wielded by justice and courage, had restored order not through cruelty, but through acknowledgement of merit and virtue. In the aftermath, as the assembly dispersed, the Duke and Elara lingered. The hall, once a theater of accusation and tension, now bore witness to the quiet solidity of their alliance. "The ordeal is not yet concluded," he said softly, "but your dignity, your courage, has secured the first victory. Together, we shall navigate the remainder." Elara, drawing a deep breath, felt the cumulative weight of months of fear and uncertainty ease from her shoulders. For the first time, she sensed the possibility of agency, of recognition, of life lived not in shadows but in the sunlight of acknowledgement. Later, in the private warmth of the Duke's study, with firelight dancing across gilded walls, the final gesture of their shared journey toward restoration occurred. He knelt before her, not as master, not as savior, but as partner in a life now shared in earnest acknowledgement of worth, resilience, and unspoken affection. "You were hidden from the world," he said, voice soft, yet resolute, yet never from my fate. "Will you allow me the honor of standing beside you, not as protector alone, but as companion, equal in station and heart?" Tears, unbidden and unashamed, traced delicate paths down Elara's cheeks. She nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Miles, I will." The wedding carriage, adorned with white roses and trailing ribbons, moved slowly through the snow-dusted grounds at dawn, carrying them toward a future long denied by cruelty, yet now embraced through courage and unwavering devotion. The bells of the estate rang echoing across frozen gardens, announcing a triumph not merely of title, but of character, resilience, and the quiet assertion of truth over falsehood. Elara, seated beside her Duke, felt the warmth of belonging and the affirmation of dignity restored. The world outside might still harbor whispers, but within the light of this victory they mattered little. What had been hidden beneath stone and malice had emerged, radiant and irrevocable, to claim the life and recognition she had long deserved. The conservatory, the cellar, and the hall, all remnants of past trials, remained as silent witnesses to her endurance. And in that final reflection, both she and the Duke understood a truth that neither title nor wealth could dictate. Courage, dignity, and steadfast love could transform not only the lives of those who wielded them, but the world that had once sought to suppress them. In that moment, the story of Lady Elara Whitcombe was no longer one of victimhood or concealment, but of triumph, recognition, and the enduring promise of what might be won through unwavering moral fortitude and the rare, transformative grace of shared understanding.